Hey guys, it's me Thorax, and you can tell by today's title, Brony Throwback Thursday. Let's jump to the intro. Today, we're going to be going back on the history of Equestria. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Equestria Historical 2, Starswirl, and the Crusade. Anyway, I'm sorry I have not take time doing the video of Brony Throwback Thursday this Thursday. No, last Thursday, what I meant to say. I've been going through a lot, but now, since it's over, I guess I'm going to have to go back on what I normally do is represent MLP like I should without drama. Anyway, we're going to go back on Equestria Historical, and this is really, really very interesting because the history of Starswirl Bear, who create the elements of harmony, I think with Smart Cookie and Clover the Clever, it's really exciting, and I know people are dying to know how did Equestria get born as the land called home. So, with no further ado, please enjoy this video. Oh, and about the credit, I still need to work on my phone. If not, I probably need to wait until I get my phone back or just get a new LG phone because all my information of crediting has gone with it, and it's hard for me to work on this equipment on giving credit since most of the phone don't keep tracks of memorizing unless the memo notepad has been downloaded. So, you know what? Maybe my next video I will do crediting at the end, considering I still have Google document that help me keep notes of every info that I need. Even if my phone got stolen, I have backup for it. So without further ado, excuse my language. Without further ado, everyone enjoy this video, and I'll be back on editing credit as soon as I'm ready to do the next video. Until then, sit down, watch, and enjoy the history that you're about to experience of Equestria.
Why, hello again. Do you remember me? I'm Sky Shadow, the historical archivist who helped you last time. So, how did you enjoy Volume 1 of the Condensed History of Equestria? Since you've come back, I presume you've come for the second book in the series, am I right? Here we are, Volume 2, Starswirl, Equestria, and the Crusades. Shall we take a look? When the Three-Way War was approaching the end of its 4th decade, a certain unicorn stallion began to make a name for himself. Though not of noble birth, he was immensely powerful and conducted studies on numerous spells. However, Starswirl the Bearded did not advocate the war and refused to aid the unicorn monarchy in their fight. Instead, he preferred to keep to his own research and distance himself from the conflict and other ponies as much as possible. The only exception to this was his apprentice, a unicorn filly orphaned by the war, whom Starswirl had taken in. However, his apprentice had strong feelings about the war, wanting to see it brought to an end, and as she matured, the two had many arguments about the matter. Eventually, it was the recklessness of his apprentice that forced Starswirl's hoof. On one of their many journeys across the land, they came upon a particularly fierce battle. The Spellstone barrier in an Earth Pony town had failed, and the fighting had spilled into the streets, endangering every pony who lived there. Starswirl's apprentice recklessly charged the battlefield, intent on protecting the young foals of the village from the horrors of war. Fearing for the life of his apprentice, Starswirl at last stepped forward, and using his immense powers, single-hoofedly brought the fighting to a halt. And on the spot, he forced the stubborn tribal leaders into a non-negotiable peace treaty by literally bullying them into it. This was known as the Treaty of Stalliongrad. While this ultimately led to the end of this ages-old conflict, sadly, the relationship between Starswirl and his apprentice was not so easily mended. The actions of Starswirl's apprentice had gone against her master's wishes, and while Clover the Clever would become a celebrated magician in her own right, the relationship she shared with her master was forever strained. Of all the magicians of this era, Starswirl remains the most prominently documented. The princesses have even dedicated an entire wing to his life's work here in the archives. However, the truce he had created between the tribes was fragile, and when Starswirl returned to his studies alone, there was no one to act as mediator. The tribe shared a begrudging peace of necessity. The Earth ponies needed the sunlight and good weather provided by the unicorns and Pegasi, and every pony was dependent on the crops they grew. But years of enmity were not so easily dispelled. Their peace was held together by their codependency, but the tribes were cold towards one another at their exchanges, each festering hatred for the others. It wasn't long before the world around them became as cold as their hearts. Almost eerily, a terrible blizzard descended upon the tribes. Earth ponies could not grow their crops, Pegasi couldn't control the ice and strong winds, and the sun was lost behind a dark layer of clouds. Beset by cold, mounting snow, and famine, tempers ran high at the tribal summit. They all blamed one another, and the only thing keeping them from another war was, ironically, the storm itself. No pony was willing to take unnecessary risks in such wild weather. Unable to come to a mutually beneficial conclusion, the leaders of all three tribes began to seek a new place to live. Since you've no doubt been to at least one hearth-warming pageant, I'm sure you know the rest of the story. In their search for a new land, the leaders stumbled on one another and began to fight, which in turn caused a blizzard to descend. They found themselves trapped in a cave, the walls frozen. Faced by their own inevitable end, they at last put aside their differences, creating a magic spark. That spark exposed and defeated the Wendigos causing the blizzard, forming lasting bonds of friendship between the tribal leaders and their attendants. And thus, the nation of Equestria was founded. Of course, establishing a new country was much more difficult than the hearth-warming pageants might have led you to believe. Many ponies still harbored their prejudices toward the other tribes and were reluctant to trust them. So the leaders began slowly, taking small groups of their most loyal followers to establish towns in the new land, which nowadays is considered to be central Equestria. In each settlement, they placed an equal number of unicorns, earth ponies, and pegasi, forcing them to work together to build their new home. This created a bond between them, and as time went on, more such settlements were made. Eventually, the unity started by these small towns spread to all the outlying territories, and soon, ponies of all three tribes could be found all across Equestria. And overseeing it all was the High Pony Council, a government fashioned after the Cloud Senate of Hebanopolis, where the tribal leaders acted as representatives and listened to the concerns of delegates to solve Equestria's problems. Unfortunately, not every pony was so welcoming to these new changes. Delegates of the council were chosen by fair election to represent the concerns of their town or region. But in the old kingdom of the unicorns, governing typically fell to the nobles. Suddenly ousted from their former positions, many nobles were unhappy with the new regime. They believed themselves entitled to the lands and tithes they once collected in the name of the crown. Now, they were expected to contribute in return, while the duties of governing and tax collection fell to the delegates. Of all the nobles angered by this change, none were as vocal as Prince Pyrite, a distant relative and former suitor of Princess Platinum. And while the princess served as one of the tribal representatives of the Unicorns Council, Pyrite was plotting rebellion. Pyrite gathered together all the malcontent nobles and declared their lands as independent of Equestria, with Pyrite himself as king. Pyrite, however, was not a good planner, and while his cohorts were preemptively celebrating their victory, the peasantry disagreed. When the united armies of Equestria arrived to lay siege, Pyrite's subjects happily assisted in turning him over to Princess Platinum and the other Equestrian founders. And while you may not recognize the name of Pyrite's defection, Fool's Gold's rebellion is well remembered. Several generations after the rebellion, Equestria faced a different kind of revolution. Now that they had established themselves as a nation whose peoples were unified, their curiosity about the world beyond their borders began to increase. There was also a revival in the old belief of alicorns as deities, and many saw their vanished kingdom as a sort of lost Holy Land. Many ponies were inspired to seek it out, but none of these smaller expeditions were as momentous as the crusades. These were a series of large-scale quests into the lands beyond Equestria, organized by the High Pony Council, as well as Equestria's first real contact with outside civilizations. Their impact on early equestrian living was enormous, bringing in trade of new goods, new ideas, and new species. But they also sometimes brought other things, like disease or war. The first land to be encountered was a prosperous and magically advanced kingdom to the north, inhabited by a race of ponies very similar to Earth ponies, but possessed of gemstone radiance and magic, the Crystal Empire. When Equestria had still been divided by war, the Empire flourished, watching sadly from afar. But even Archking Thunder the Great didn't dare attempt to challenge the Empire without magical aid, because the Empire was protected by the great power of the Crystal King. He was a mysterious pony that almost never appeared in public, even to his own people. But he had ruled for centuries, and in the wake of the cataclysm, he created a haven for all those ponies who had come to him in despair. When Equestria at last sought out his nation in the Crusades, he welcomed them peacefully, with friendship and guidance. But the Crystal King never once revealed himself, and Equestria was no closer to the Lost Kingdom. The next crusade sent out was not nearly as successful. Saddle Arabia was an arid and unfriendly land far to the south, past the Badlands. Its inhabitants built their lives around the few rivers and oases to be found, a country made up not of ponies, but horses. At first, things went well, and the Crusaders were welcomed, albeit warily. The Saddle Arabians were particularly uncomfortable in the presence of unicorns and magic, but tolerated them for the sake of trade. Things took a turn for the worse, however, when the Crusaders expressed their interest in finding alicorn relics. It was learned that within the desert was an ancient temple supposedly built by the alicorns. A small group of explorers set out to find it, but were forcibly dragged back to the capital and executed for trespassing on holy ground. The High Pony Council was outraged by such a senseless act, demanding an explanation, but Saddle Arabia had already begun to forcibly eject Equestrian Crusaders from their land. Things quickly deteriorated from that point. It wasn't long before the two lands were engaged in a war that would last 7 years. It was a mare by the name of Enduring Patience that took it upon herself to end the war. Formerly a soldier in the Equestrian army, alone she entered Saddle Baghdad and the palace of the Sultan to learn his reasons for executing the explorers. Seeing a lone earth pony, the Sultan saw her as no threat and allowed her to remain. Every day, Patience would petition the king for his reasons, and every day she would be rejected. The populace tolerated her presence, but she was often abused and mistreated by them as a scapegoat for the war. Seeing the torment she was suffering at the hands of his subjects, the Sultan's daughter, Princess Mirage, moved Patience into the palace. There, Enduring Patience was taught about the culture and beliefs of the Saddle Arabians, slowly coming to understand their ways. And as she befriended Princess Mirage, the princess too began to plead with her father to talk to the mare. Seeing her determination, even as she came to embrace his culture, the Sultan at last acquiesced to Patience's request to an audience and explained his reasons. In Saddle Arabian history, they too had fallen under alicorn rule in the past. Their land, once a flourishing paradise, was used as an area of magical experimentation, and over time, the country had become the arid desert it was known to be. And the Saddle Arabians, a species further behind in cultural advancement than the favored equestrians, had been used as slave labor by the alicorns, watching helplessly as their once beautiful land was drained of all life by alicorn spells. The temple in the heart of the desert was the only remaining structure of the alicorns' rule, sealed by powerful magic. To the Arabians, it was a cursed place, a reminder of their terrible past. And while they had welcomed the equestrians in their land, the unicorns had made them anxious. They were afraid of their magic, that they might breach the walls of that cursed place and reawaken the horrors that had bound them in the past. Patience returned to Equestria to tell the council what she had learned. In exchange for agreeing to leave the desert temple alone, Saddle Arabia's Sultan issued a personal apology to Equestria and her people. And while it would be centuries before good relations were re-established between the two countries, at least this war had been brought to a peaceful conclusion, all thanks to the friendship between a simple earth pony mare and an Arabian princess. And there you have it, Volume 2 of the Condensed History of Equestria. The next volume is really interesting. It details famous ponies like Galileo and the Age of Chaos. You want to check them both out? Sorry. The archives only allows ponies to check out one tome at a time from this section. We're not exactly a standard library. There's any number of protection spells in the books, as I'm sure you've noticed. Didn't have to return your first book, did you? That's because there's a time teleportation enchantment on the books that automatically returns them to the archives when they're due. It even puts them back on the shelves in order for us. If you like, though, I can keep Volume 3 on hold for you until your next visit. I hope you enjoy your history. Well, until next time. Huh? What? You again? Didn't I send you home already? I thought I told you before, this area is off limits. Out. Out, 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 out. Ugh. Weird. Why are they getting in here so often? Unless... Nah, couldn't be. Right?
I'm here to show you who I am. Throw off the veil, it's finally time. There's more to me than glitz and glam. Oh, oh. And now I feel my stars align. For I had believed what I was sold. I did all the things that I was told. But all that has changed and now I'm bold. 'Cause I know that I am just a pony. I make mistakes from time to time. But now I know the real me and put my heart out on the line. And let the magic in my heart stay true. Whoa. And let the magic in my heart stay true. Whoa. Just like the magic inside of you. And now I see those colors right before my eyes. I hear my voice so clearly and I know that it is right. They thought I was weak, but I am strong. They sold me the world, but they were wrong. And now that I'm back, I still belong. 'Cause I know that I am just a pony. I make mistakes from time to time. But now I know the real me and put my heart out on the line. And let the magic in my heart stay true. Whoa. And let the magic in my heart stay true. Whoa. I thought I was weak, but I am strong. They sold me the world, but they were wrong. And now that I'm back, I still belong. 'Cause I know that I am just a pony. I make mistakes from time to time. Now I know the real me and put my heart out on the line. And let the magic in my heart stay true. And let the magic in my heart stay true. Just like the magic inside of you. Just like the magic inside of you.